Good morning, this is Paul from Chess Power. Chess Power educates kids in chess and embraces chess. We teach chess in New Zealand, in Auckland mainly. This is a Chess Power video tutorial, and our mission is to give every child the opportunity to play chess, not just in New Zealand but around the world. You can learn more at chesspower.co.nz. The way our video tutorials work is we're going to give you a couple of questions, and you need to see if you can work out the answers by pausing the video, and then once you've had a good think about it you can unpause and continue the video and find out if you're correct or not. Now, I highly recommend that you do pause the video, because that is really where you're going to get the most value, because you're going to have to start using your mental muscles to get the answer worked out. Now, when we start the video, we're going to get straight into it. So if we look at this position, I set this position up to illustrate knight forks, and it turns out there's more than one knight fork in the analysis of the position. I first thought that it's very straightforward for white to win here, once you understand the hidden tactical rules that white has. But it turns out it's not so simple at all, which is often the case in chess. So what white needs to do is see if he can find a way to win. It looks like he's in a bit of trouble at the moment, because the knight is being attacked by the pawn on h6 and by the queen on d8. And white's options for moving forward, knight takes e6, knight takes f7, and knight takes h7, they're all protected squares, so white will lose the knight. So it looks like white has to retreat, and if he moves to knight f3, well, black does have a fork, and I want you to pause the video and see if you can find out what that fork is. Okay, if you've been watching, you should have found that black can play queen d8 to d1, check, forking the king and the knight, so the queen has to come in between, and black can win the knight with queen takes f3. In addition, the queen can also play queen d3 check, and if the queen interposes, black plays queen takes knight, probably winning the queen endgame. So, knight can't come to f3, so it looks like it has to come to e4, perhaps with an idea of knight to f6. But white has got a hidden tactic, so I want you to pause the video again, see if you can find the answer. Okay, one of the things I teach my kids is the spot check. The spot check is looking at all captures and all checks within any given position. So every time you move, look at checks and captures first. And this is a really good hint if you're even an adult playing competitive chess. White can play knight takes h7, knight takes f7, and knight takes e6, but also queen g7 check and queen h8 check. So what white needs to realize is that if the king was on h8, white could play knight takes f7 check and fork the king and the queen. So the answer is queen h8 check, king has to take, knight takes f7. And now the king and queen are forked, the king comes back to g7 and the knight takes on d8. Now when I first set up this puzzle, I thought, well, white's winning quite easily. He's got a passed a pawn which can shoot and become a queen, and he's also got an extra piece. So one of the really good ideas if your pieces up is to swap all the pieces off so that the defender has no pieces left and you've got an extra piece. So that's exactly what white's done. He's managed to swap the queens off using that fork tactic and has ended up an extra knight up. But it turns out things aren't so simple, because black also has a passed pawn and it's on the h file. And h pawns are notoriously difficult for knights to stop. So there's a couple of options for black. He can push this pawn up, or maybe he could bring his king across to defend the pawn on e6. Now the other thing you should be aware of, which is a really important resource in this endgame, is that if a black wins the A pawn, then it's a draw. And the reason it's a draw is because you cannot checkmate with a knight and king alone. So that A pawn is absolutely critical for white to win. Right, so what can black do? Well, if he pushes the H pawn, H5, white has knight takes E6, check, king comes to F6, and the knight can come to F4 to stop the pawn. If the pawn moves forward, then the knight's stopping the pawn going further on H3. But if the king comes forward, plays king G5, it looks like white has to play knight H3 check, or knight G2 perhaps. So is that the case? That's the next question for you, is does the knight have to drop back to save the knight, or is there another option for white? Pause the video and have a think. Okay, well, it turns out that the strength of white's pawn is unstoppable. So white can actually play A4 here. And if black takes the knight, white can play A5 and the pawn cannot be stopped. Now, the way you work out whether you can stop a passed pawn or not with a king is to draw a square for the pawn. So you draw a square going up through to the edge of the board where it's going to, the row it's going to queen on, and the square forms that shape there. So if the king, defending king, can move inside the square, either e4, e5, on its move, it can stop the pawn. But if it can't, then white wins, so the attacking passed pawn wins. So in this case, white's moved, so he moves here. Now the square of the pawn is moved to here, and the king cannot get inside the square of the pawn, so white wins. A6, king d6, a7, king c7, and white wins with queen. So, h4 doesn't seem to work too well. Sorry, h5 doesn't seem to work that well. So what about if black plays king f6? Well, this is a really great move because it brings the king into the center, so black can implement a strategy of chasing down the a pawn, but it also, more importantly, shuts the knight out of the action. So now the knight has to come around to c6. So knight goes to c6, and this is quite good for black because now he can push the pawn and it's hard for the knight to get back. But you'd be surprised how quickly the knight can travel. So black can play h5, and white has a couple of choices here. He can play knight d4, which is fine. The reason why I don't like knight d4 is the king can come into e5 and attack the knight, and the king gets into a central square, so I quite like king c2 here. And then black plays h4, and now white has to bring the knight back to stop the h-pawn, so knight d4 is forced, and then black plays h3, and then the knight comes to f3. So it looks like all's well and good, the knight's been stopped, but then black can use his other pawn to advance, e5. King comes to d3, and then black sees he has a fork, playing e4 check, so he first brings his king up to support the fork. White sees that he's going to do a fork, so he moves across, and then black plays e4. And now white, looks like white has to play knight h2. So in the second part of the lesson, this video is going to end, and in the second part of the lesson I'm going to show you that white does have another choice, another option, and I want you to see if you can find it.